Irma, was it, or the devastating hurricane in Dominica, when Prime Minister Keith Rowley spoke and said, if you have family in Dominica, permit them to come. Dominica has approximately 70,000 people. Even if all of Dominica was to come, Trinidad has a population of 1.3 million. Nominally speaking, it's a population increase, but our anxiety towards it, as if we now will become overpopulated and othered. Our constant fear of the outside, it significantly limits free movement, and we see this all the time in the treatment of Guyanese as they travel throughout the Caribbean, Jamaicans. And it happens. And another limitation is our lack of shared currency. That we do trade with each other all the time. All the time. And we see this happening in an organic basis when it comes to our higglers, our traffickers. They're trading. And this trade is obstructed to a substantial degree because of a lack of a shared currency and a lack of a smooth currency policy. And integration will be so much deeper with this. And we see the benefits to this, but then the anxiety towards having a shared currency, of giving up the right to control my currency, of not having to choose either fixed or floating, and our desire for sovereignty to decide. Because we have to remember, for post-colonial states who for centuries were told what to do, independence and sovereignty is extremely important. And so what do I suggest to reshape this integration? Now, Billig suggested something called banal nationalism, and I've reconstructed this to have a banal regionalism. Now, banal nationalism proposes that persons create a national identity around shared institutions, symbols, signs. And we see this all the time. We just witnessed it. The Independence Day of St. Vincent just passed. We saw the national colors. We saw the flag. Is there a regional equivalent? There was, at least in the English-speaking Caribbean, West Indies cricket. David Rudder's song Rally Around the West Indies has become the de facto national anthem of the West Indies cricket team. Persons saw that symbol and associated with it. When the male West Indies team won the T20 World Cup competition, the entire region was rejoicing. In a matter of days, champion got millions of views on YouTube. It had regional traction. What are the regional symbols that we can come around to allow ourselves to feel like we are one? And is there a conscious effort to making those regional symbols and signs evident? What do we associate with a CARICOM flag? There's a CARICOM song, but we don't associate with it. And secondly, an imagined community. Now, Gellner posits that nations are formed by imagined community. You have yet to meet every person in St. Vincent, but you view yourself as a part of the community of Vincentians. There are Vincentians in the diaspora, there are Vincentian space that you've never been to or interacted with. Imagine communities hold nations together, they hold spaces, especially larger spaces. And this is bound together by shared knowledge, a shared media that reiterates a shared experience. And we have this, oftentimes when natural disasters hit. And it is sad that our only desire for this broader identity happens when natural disasters hit. And so, to kind of bring it back round, to quote Oenata, the people of the Caribbean today face a set of challenges of a complexity and magnitude that are unprecedented in the history of the Caribbean. And it demands government and people to carefully think of what they're supposed to do in a timeless effort and response. And this especially deals with globalization. And I add on climate change. What is this to say? Now, the images portrayed above, apologies, shows the devastating impact of Maria and devastating impact of the hurricane in Dominica, right? And so, from the cyclone Irma, there was accumulated $31 million delved out to Caribbean states from CRIF, right? In response to helping to deal with the rebuilding of these spaces. And this is Antigua, Anguilla, St. Kitts, Turks and Caicos, Haiti, the Bahamas. We are innately aware of a similarity when climate experiences occur, when we have climatic shocks. And these climatic shocks are not relegated to the small spaces, because we see climatic shocks in all the Windward Islands or the Leeward Islands, but we now see climatic shocks affecting spaces like Trinidad and Tobago. We see freak hurricanes manifesting right outside of Mexico. We are innately aware of our vulnerability. And so, what are my recommendations in reshaping this Caribbean identity? I suggest a pan-Caribbean broadcasting union. And it's hard and it's not so easy. And you can be integrated if you want to via social media, via the internet. But you have to go out of your way to feel this sense of community. And a pan-Caribbean broadcasting union will prevent or minimize the degree of insular rhetoric that fundamentally divides the space, the region, of the type of talk that others different Caribbean territories. Another recommendation is increased collaboration in terms of cultural arts and sports, music, visual arts. There's not enough content created on the Caribbean for the Caribbean, regardless of the language. When we hear similar songs in similar languages, or regardless of the language, we feel a great connection. We just had the OECS swim meet over the weekend. That is a form of association. When we have the CPL, we're looking to see how our Caribbean teams are doing. How do we further increase interaction and collaboration via sports and arts to allow us to rally around signs, symbols, events, collectively? And we underscore and underestimate how sports brings the region together. How artists have integrated our space. How I am quoting the words of Black Stallion, Trinidad and Calypsonian right now, or at this lecture. How, whether we were aware or not, the song that won Road March in Trinidad and Tobago was conceptualized by a Vincentian, but the beat of it was bound and connected to Dominica. And it shows that creatively we connect in these different and diverse ways. And my last recommendation, harmonization of regional transportation. Proximity makes things, how shall I put it? Accessibility makes things feel closer or farther than they really are. It is possible for me to go to the north or to two very far points in a contiguous space easily. I can attest to going from Kingston to Montego Bay in a couple hours and coming back in a couple hours. Is it possible to make an easy day trip to Union Island back in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? And how easy is that? In the same day. And furthermore, not even within St. Vincent, throughout the region, we need to harmonize our transportation to make traveling throughout the region not so difficult. Do we consider the accessibility of different points? And these things are not new. They've suggested having regional hubs for transportation. They've suggested maritime transportation. And, promoters, the fishermen, traders, travel despite the restrictions to travel. But what are we as people and as people and as policymakers and as stakeholders doing to promote this desire for harmonization of regional transportation? Or do we accept them as is? Because if you can see St. Lucia from St. Vincent, why can't we just go? Why is there not a constant ferry to St. Lucia from St. Vincent and you could see it? I'm just saying, questions to ask. And so, to conclude, to wrap this up, and I know I've been around a lot of different concepts, some foreign, some not so foreign. A Caribbean identity does exist. We do identify with the Caribbean space. But it is somewhat opaque, and we require a clear, more encompassing pan-Caribbean identity That is not just about the insular Caribbean spaces that are right next to us, but about the entire basin. Now we must know that it has been shaped by our geography and our colonial past. That we did not really set the parameters for our nationness. But our regional identity can be constructed around shared signs and symbols and experience, similar to how our national identity is constructed. And it is this shared identity that is needed to promote regional integration as they allay our anxiety towards the loss of sovereignty. So guys, back to the Onata quote. We live in a globalized world, in a climate-affected world. The global economy and climate change does not care about our insularity. It does not care about our lack of feeling towards another country. The same hurricane that can devastate St. Lucia can devastate Antigua. The same chikungunya that sweeps its way through the Dominican Republic can reach to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We together signed many agreements, CARIFORUM, which is just CARICOM and the Dominican Republic. So we're in a constant process of working together. But a lack of association with the overall region, lack of a strong association that cause and demands for a greater, more expedient regional integration is lacking. And so it is not about the rational benefits to this integration, because those rational benefits have already been said. Are we at a point when we want to feel a greater sense of community with the entire Caribbean region, or with the larger Caribbean region? And that's why I say today, let us rethink it. If we limit our Caribbean identity to our island space and to our proximate spaces, we are doing us an injustice. Because remember, we did not define our borders. They were defined for us. And those definitions has led us to be substantially and significantly vulnerable to our global economy and to climate change. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this was a very thought-provoking lecture. I'm sure we would have learned a few things, because I'll be honest with you, I never heard that Latin term. Where is it? Uti possidetis juris? That's new to me. I never realized Mako was a French term. I mean, I did a bit of French, but I think it's more patois, as you say. So we do pick up a few things here and there. Now, if you have your questions, I'm here to receive them and read them so that Mr. Sam can give his responses. Mr. Sam, the first question: who is responsible for our lack or slow process to integration? Isn't it our traditional governments?
We like to say it's our traditional governments, but governments do what is politically expedient, and they lack the political will. When we complain about roads, election time our road does get paved up and smooth down, yeah? Okay. Have we made integration a mandate and a must by our governments? Do we see integration as a part of government and state manifestos? We are the electorate. Because of our tendency and anxiety towards migration and integration, we tend to not think about it. But we are the ones that have the power to push the agenda. And even recently there have been petitions towards it, but as an electorate, do we say that this is an agenda that must be spoken about on a national level? And this is just not in St. Vincent, but throughout the region. Or are we so concerned with only our domestic affairs, and do we not see how these regional things affect us domestically? I hope that substantially answers the question.
I have done loads of questions here for you. I can't digest them fast enough, so I'll read them as I get them. In the contemporary Caribbean, ICT and transportation create, to a certain extent, a continuous space. Could it then be that the movement towards Caribbean integration, given all of its benefits, remains challenged primarily because of political and issues of governance? How do we move past this towards integration?
All right. Now, I'll tackle this from a governmental perspective, okay? And it's kind of tied into the first answer. CARICOM, for example, as one institution, does not have what you call supranational authority. CARICOM cannot make a decision and make our governments do anything. Governments have to then institute them domestically. And so it comes back to the saying that we like to blame the governments, and I understand. But do we look ourselves in the mirror and see that it has to be a talking point? That yes, we do have these informal forms of integration. Like I personally just trying to learn French Creole because I find that to be fun. I could Google it and I could ask a friend and I can, but that is me going out of my way. How do these forms of integration become so seamless? And for you to have a seamless form of integration, it has to be institutionally supported. And for there to have institutional support, you need to have some form of government intervention. And that has to be pushed by the people.
This question is politically loaded, so be prepared. If you were the leader, the political leader of St. Vincent, what will be the first thing you undertake to bind our islands politically? Before you answer, the questioner says, if your answer is correct, I will vote for you.
Is it one single thing, or is it an entire comprehensive policy? Right. The first thing that I really would do is push for burden sharing when it comes to regional transportation. Burden sharing when it comes to regional transportation. Burden sharing. In other words, burden sharing. So what happens is, throughout the region, a substantial portion of our transportation cost is incurred via tax. Right? And the persons that pay it are the travelers, the members of the region. And so by having a burden sharing, we are collectively as a region generating revenue. And I'm not, like this was suggested by the Prime Minister of Barbados in a recent town hall meeting. Because we know we want to reduce the taxation to minimize the entire cost. I mean, if you look at a flight to St. Lucia, over half of the cost is incurred in tax. Now we understand that we have to generate revenues, but by having a burden sharing regime when it comes to the collection of funds to regional transportation, A, you're still collecting revenue. B, by having burden sharing, you're actually facilitating a greater good of inter-regional transportation. Now yes, you may have the beggar thy neighbor part, not beggar thy neighbor, you have a situation whereby not all persons are getting the same benefit, relative gain versus absolute gain. But as a collective, we will benefit more. And so by having a burden sharing approach to regional transportation, A, by being able to visit different spaces, the region feels less divided, right? And by having it to be cheaper, it facilitates it, right? But that's just one small thing, yes? And it has to, and so that's what I'm saying. As one single state, the most one single state can do is propose it and minimize it for themselves. But it has to be a collective approach, right? A more how should I put it? A more single person or one country individual as a single actor, single person would be to ease restrictions on freedom of movement. And I think St. Vincent has a relatively smooth and inclusive policy when it comes to movement.
I do have a question factory here. In our quest to one-up each other, the islands move towards independence. Most of us only months apart. Yet, we have all held on to having a Governor General. Is this a way of holding on to a way of integration?
Personally, I would not think that would be the case, because we have, for example, the CARICOM Secretariat is in Guyana. Guyana has a Governor General. No. Dominica is the Commonwealth of Dominica. Dominica doesn't have a Governor General. The desire for a Governor General is cultural. It is subjective. It is probably because of a strong association with the Crown. I personally am not necessarily most in favor of it, just from a concept. I think that if you truly are a sovereign state, if you truly are an independent state, you should feel free to select your own head of, state. But those things have been politicized, and so I don't think it is a broader regional identity, because, what's that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because the thing is, we don't look towards the Governor General as a common symbol. Nobody, because we don't think of the Governor General when you think about regional integration. Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I talked loud enough. What I'm saying is that the Queen, in our way of things, a lovely lady she is, but a bit of anachronism. But for us to determine or to decide we all want to be little republics is going to exacerbate the problem that was caused when we became independent and refused to federate.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to push as hard as we can to return to a state of confederation, just like the Canadian model. And then we have a president, call him whatever you want to call him, who symbolizes that Caribbean unity, that union of Caribbean states as one nation.
Yeah.
Until we get that, we can have a real struggle.
And so I agree with you.
Thank you.
You have to, that's a beautiful commentary, that you have to have that federal, highly integrated infrastructure before having a single Governor General, because what a Caribbean Governor General or head of state would imply is a political union, and one that would probably be in the federal sort, and we are nowhere close to that, because we've yet to have an economic union in its purest sense, and so that would be one of the last symbols of a truly integrated space in that of a federation. Yeah.
Okay, so several of the questions that I have border around basically the same theme of regional integration. So I asked this question: with so many scholarly papers, so many research on the truth, facts, reality about regional integration, why are we still so afraid to fully embrace regional integration or Caribbean identity?
It really comes from, there once again, a lot of different things compound and come together, right? We as Caribbean people have been subjects to external forces. We have been colonies, etc., right? After all these years, I have now become independent to make my own decision. Do I want to cede that authority to somebody else? So you have an anxiety by ceding because you already have had that experience. Then now, over time, you've constructed to say, okay, I am Vincentian, you are St. Lucian, you are Grenadian. And so you now think of yourself so different. And then now you have this geographical impediment. And so what happens, in my opinion, there are papers and there's a lot of information. But do we live an experience of integration? And because of previous anxieties, we've shifted apart so much that we now have to institutionally bring ourselves together. An example of this is, for example, in the Southern Grenadines, right? So There are persons that go seamlessly between Carriacou, Union, Petit Martinique, etc. Seamlessly, right? Now, the state would say that when you enter from one state into another, you have to register this and that. But you are telling people who have been doing this cross-national travel before we were nation states to now shift. Prior to independence, you had no sovereignty. You would just go from one state to another. And so upon independence, we have shifted and grown apart. And because of our desire to have something that is ours, a country that is ours, a space that is ours. But whilst that is good, for the ego, for the psyche, the global economy and climate change does not care about that. And so you can understand it. And because if this was not so, we would have a global country. Persons have their own nuances to form in a space. And we have to realize that because of our vulnerability, that we have to come together, because the things that have brought us apart make us more vulnerable. And it's a roundabout way to saying that all our shared experiences have made us not want to come together.
Looks like you anticipated this question that is coming here. You spoke about travel. How do you see the role of LIAT in helping to forge regional identity?
Well, I will not single out LIAT particularly, but I will say regional air transportation. I appreciated Caribbean Airlines, and this is a segue, right? By saying, the Caribbean Airlines, the Caribbean identity, and by articulating that, the Caribbean identity, because Caribbean Airlines is very expansive. Now, LIAT does a wonderful job in connecting the Eastern Caribbean. That's a sub-region. The taxation issues, that is governmental. Customer service, that is LIAT. And obviously, right, they need to fix that. But we've had poor customer service from other airlines. Like, for example, I used to call Caribbean Airlines the Caribbean taxi, because when I leave Jamaica in the morning, I landing down in Antigua, St. Martin, then landing down in Trinidad to come back up to Barbados, to overnight to land back in St. Vincent on a LIAT. And so LIAT plays a key role in connecting the Eastern Caribbean, and it could be more efficient in the form of connection. And so even in looking at the hub or the headquarters of LIAT brings some anxiety, because has there been a full hub system to allow for smooth and seamless inter-regional transport, especially in the Eastern Caribbean? But the bigger question is not just the LIAT and the Eastern Caribbean. How do we connect the LIAT to the CALs or to the Cayman Airs? Or how does LIAT efficiently go to Guyana or Suriname, right? And those are the bigger questions that we have to ask, not just the LIAT question, because LIAT has a key role in connecting the space and in providing affordable and good service that allows for people to want to travel. But it's not just LIAT; it's all the air transportation, entities.
This wicket is a very sticky wicket, so you'll get all kinds of questions. So we now move from transportation to a bit of religion. Do you see a role played by Anglicanism in shaping a Caribbean identity?
A substantial role. When we look at identity, we're speaking about imagery, experiences, culture, right? The fact that the driving force for Caribbean integration was the English-speaking Caribbean, and the English-speaking Caribbean makes up a division in the Anglican, I guess, jurisdiction, and that there's a Caribbean association. For example, the bishops of the Windward Islands is a transnational bishop. Bishop Friday is not the bishop of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, right? He is the bishop of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Grenada. The diocese expands beyond single states. You can go to an Anglican church in another state, Belize, Bahamas. You will see similar things. And furthermore, education and interaction via camps facilitated through the church allows for an association, because you already have a fundamental cultural and religious connection. And so it eases integration, because a substantial degree of anxiety and othering is religion. And whilst we have different religions in the region, but I would say institutionally, because of connectivity and because of movement, it has done a significant job. Even, for example, schooling. You could just mention the name bishops. that is a regional title for a form of Anglican secondary school. Depending on what you're going to say, you know a bishop's girl, you will get a race, etc. Right? Or a smile. There's strong relation, there's the Bishop's College of Karakou. And so because of institutions, because of interactions, because of education, the Anglican Church has and continues to play a strong role. As I said, is the Anglican Church of the Cayman Islands and Jamaica, representing the growth of that connection. And as much as Cayman Islanders have this associate, have a new association, that historical connection is represented in the Anglican Church.
What is the difference between assimilation and integration?
That's a beautiful.
Or is there a difference?
That's a beautiful question. Huh? Assimilation implies, I try not to say this in an overly wordy way. Assimilation implies integrating to the point of almost having what we call homogeneity, like there's not any distinction. Integration means you're coming together. It's like soup, right? You could have different parts. It's one soup. You have the dumpling, you have the provision, you have the meat. It makes the flavor. That is integration. It boils together to create something new and something different. That is integration. Assimilation is when you make juice and you put the sugar and the juice and the water and you get this homogeneous thing and you drink it and you can't tell different parts. And so we're asking for integration. That you could like the dumpling, or you could say just want the soup with sauce and meat. That not just this, not just one or the other, but the different diversity that to collectively make something diverse as opposed to one, monolithic or homogeneous thing.
What are the main factors for the rich cultural diversity in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? To what extent is cultural identity celebrated and embraced? And how does cultural identity enable integration to happen?
Well, St. Vincent has an interesting identity because I say that we don't fully understand the magnitude of the contribution of our indigenous peoples. So Jamaica became a colony of England in 1655, right? St. Vincent had significant sovereignty by England. In other words, England took control of St. Vincent fully after 1796. For 140 years, when Barbados, when Jamaica was deep in colonialism and was deeply shaped by that, that was not our case. In fact, St. Vincent was a haven up until 1796 for persons that were enslaved or indigenous, right? So we have that context, that we have this contribution of indigenous peoples that have shaped the country. And then we have an African, descended population that have not been substantially marked by colonialism or by enslavement, right? We don't see those remnants, and so we express ourselves in a beautiful way, and then we do have diversity. Our topography allows for a beautiful isolation of communities via mountains and islands. And so if you go down in you have Big Drum, and because of the topography of Beckwood, you have a certain types of fishing villages and boat building. And then because of the fishing nature of Barrel, you have those fishing villages. And so we have a mixture of our topography because we have mountains and valleys and multiple islands and different indigenous peoples or different people groups shaping our culture that have contributed to a nice, should I say, spectrum. But we don't necessarily fully appreciate it because we don't think about it. But it exists. Now, how does culture shape integration? Because of the fact that culture shows a connected tie, right? So, for example, whether it's rice and peas or peas and rice or fried dumpling or bakes or Johnny cake, it shows a certain similarity. And culture shows celebration along festivities and experiences. And so, what culture can do, it allows for creation of new things by working together to create new things, and it shows a connecting thread. And persons of different cultures can come together and celebrate collectively and learn and share from each other. And I think that's an important part of integrating, of a cross-pollination, as it were. Because we can identify where we have similar trends and we can cross-pollinate those similar trends to create something new. Yeah.
And this is another interesting question. What would you do to to get black people most susceptible to changing their ideologies towards Caribbean integration?
Well, it depends on the type of philosophy. I mean, you really could go along like a Garveyite philosophy of, the collection, a collection of the black race and the black persons, etc. What I like to say is that for black persons and for persons of Indian descent, the only difference between myself and somebody from Guadeloupe is that my boat stopped in St. Vincent. So what makes me fundamentally, the boat of my ancestors stopped in St. Vincent. And so we grow this attachment to these islands. Yes, it's wonderful, it's beautiful. But if you understand that for persons of East Indian descent, Chinese descent, African descent, that you were brought here by colonial authorities, and that you both are all experience a similar condition, and that your differences were not necessarily innate or primordial, but we experience similar conditions. To put this into context, in the Eastern Caribbean or in the Anglophone Caribbean, who are primarily English speaking, we have never fought wars against each other. France and Germany are now the key players in the European Union. They're on opposite sides of World War II. You could point to somebody's grandfather probably killed your grandfather. In the Caribbean, you just say you don't like a man because he thief your woman or something like that. I mean, what is the depth of our anxiety? And so we have to understand that we experience a similar form of I would say exploitation, and that desire for betterment and understanding of shared experience should be strong enough to say, despite that, the fact that my boat stopped in St. Lucia instead of Belize, we're both aspiring towards a better place. Yeah.
What I have here, I think I would call it a comment on which the writer expects you to comment. And here it goes. I have concluded that the legacy of slavery colonialism has left us with permanent brain damage. We are too reliant and dependent. We continue to live a lie. Unquote.
I will agree that it has had a significant impact. But you have to know where you came from to know where you're going. And so that's why the history and the context is important. That's why I took a while into contextualizing that we don't even refer to the region in its indigenous names. We don't even have an association with that. We think in a primordial sense that my granny was from Vincian, my great granny was from Vincian, I'm a born Vincentian, and the persons and them from Guyana, their granny was from Guyana. We are so different, not understanding that we were all shaped by these things, these similar circumstances. And once again, how many persons identify the indigenous association? And so yes, it has led a lot of marks on us. However, I would not say this permanent, because we have been trying to integrate, and we constantly make efforts to integrate. We might not see it, but for example, Martinique and Guadeloupe have had more deep integration or deeper integration in the OECS, and we continue to have that integration. And people underestimate the fact that we're constantly integrating. Prior to 2016, I had very little association with the French Caribbean until I had French Caribbean classmates. And then I saw the similarity of our culture, so much so that when we were playing domino, they were speaking French Creole, but it sounded like the same form of verbose, opera that transcended language. Belizeans have an interesting outlook, and they share so many similarities. And they juxtapose being a Central American continental territory with being a Caribbean territory. And when people think Caribbean, they think island. And so we can reimagine these spaces, just like how Africa was reimagined by the same person that signed the Berlin Conference to cut arbitrary lines along rivers, etc. So we can reimagine, but do we want a better place? And that's it. Because if you think from a competitive perspective, that has been so ingrained, it's going to be hard. So yes, we have had a lot of long-standing, pain from slavery and colonization, but it can be reimagined, and we can change, and we have tried to change, albeit slow.
This is another comment on which you are expected to comment, and I quote, "The thing which comes to mind why we cannot have regional integration as opposed to be an insular state, is the lust and greed for power. This takes me back to Animal Farm, where the quote, "an utopian society will so form, but because of man's lust and greed for power, it will inevitably change."
I agree with much of the commentary that power, seeks power. Absolute power, gives nothing. However, we are once again, our globalized context will humble the most brave of us all. In a pre-globalized world, in a pre-climate change world, it is easy to feel like I want to be the king of my stone. But when a climatic shock has the ability to wipe out significant portions of your GDP for years, that you spend, instead of spending money on educating your people, you have to rebuild bridges and buttress banks, that persons of Antigua, of Barbados, are displaced, that Dominic was ravaged twice in 3 years, to the point that an education institution had to leave, that St. Vincent in a matter of in 5 years had 3 different climatic shocks, that every year during hurricane season we look with anxiety towards the weather forecast, that after the trough of 2013 we did not trust the rain. People watch the rain with anxiety, with holding their breath. And so our climatic shocks clearly provide a degree of humbling. And further to that, there are regions in Africa, in Southeast Asia, that were far behind the Caribbean 30 years ago, and who have become more developed because of consistent incremental development, because they're of less climatic vulnerability, they have more people. And so our anxiety and decision for power has only left us more vulnerable. And to even refer European EU commenters, the Caribbean integration process has been slow and weak. And so it is easy to hang on to that, but for what? Just for pride only? And I would say that because of our anemic growth over the last 30 years or so, because of vulnerability to external forces, exogenous shocks, climate shocks, it should humble us.
Okay, a lot of the questions I have are similar, so I can perhaps boil it down to one more question. Kindly explain post-colonial states' independence on sovereign states. Kindly explain post-colonial states' independence on sovereign states being important.
Well, that's an interesting phrasing. What I will say is that post-colonial, okay, how should I put it? Because states were once post-colonial, right? This has significantly impacted their sovereignty, okay? And we have post-colonial associations. So, for example, we associate as English-speaking Caribbean with the United Kingdom, right? What our post-colonial status has impacted our sovereignty is that it has made us A, cling on to the sovereignty, and B, be at the mercy of external forces. And we have also experienced a sovereignty that may not have been the most economically or politically efficient. And so our sovereignty as post-colonial state has been shaped by external sovereign states, right? So for example, the people of the Caribbean, regardless of their geography, of their language, did not say we are going to make this Caribbean state. It was given to us more or less, right? And so because our post-colonial status was given by an external sovereign state, and we now become independent in that context, we are now at the mercy of A, exist in a small space that may not be economically and politically viable, and B, always clamoring to this need for independence, and so we see this all the time in our anxiety towards integration, in our anxiety towards people coming towards us. And so to round about and say that because of our experiences, we've become independent in a way that may not be the best for us, that leaves us to have certain vulnerabilities, and in a way that has led to a lot of anxiety and desire to maintain our authority and control.
Mr. Sam, thank you very much. I can see I can see that you can stay here all night answering questions, but I think we need to give you a break now.
Thank you.
So please, a round of applause. I'm sure you will agree with me that this was most refreshing. And I believe the fact that we asked people to write their questions rather than to ask them, I think we got much more than we deserve in terms of the number of questions which I received. So I must thank you as well, you the members of the audience. At this juncture, I would like to call on the Dean to do the closing prayer.
Let us all stand. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, we give you thanks for this opportunity when we can share within this space things that are of common interest to us. We thank you for blessing the presenter and for all of those persons who have made themselves present here and who have listened and looked through Facebook or YouTube. And we continue to give you thanks for all those who helped to organize this event. Bless us individually and collectively, and take us safely to our homes. This is our prayer through Christ our Lord. God, the Holy Trinity, make you strong in faith and love, defend you on every side, and guide you in truth and peace. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you always. Amen. Just like to thank our young photographer, Simelan Hamilton, for coming out and being with us, and other media personnel. Thank you all very much. Do get home safely.